Today, we discuss RB tiers. We also throw in where we would have 2025 rookie picks ranked in this tiers. We talk kind of meta strategy, how and why we put these players where they are, all that and more. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Justin back here. You guys did a great job holding down the fort last week. I edited the episode. Thanks for doing that one without me, David and JP. Love to see our tight end episode last week. Again, this one is going to be RB tiers. Never going to guess, but we're going to do QB and wide receiver tiers in the coming weeks as well. Always love doing these tier series. David, anything you want to talk about that's happened this week? You're excited about? Maybe Monday?
I don't know. Yeah, let me think. Oh yeah, Ohio State's national champions, baby. Let's go. It was a super exciting run. A lot of fun. Love enjoying that with my family. Everyone pretty much in my family's from Ohio, or at least lived there for an extended period of time. Yeah, just super fun. Happy for that team. Happy for Ryan Day.
Yeah, it was it really wasn't that close of a game ever at any given point, but it was a fun first couple drives to watch until Ohio State just said, "Now we're just going to be in the driver's seat the whole time."
Yeah, it made me a little nervous at the end there. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, and I was never too worried for them. It just seemed like they would always be able to put them back out of it. So, anyways, fun game to watch. Lions are out of the playoffs. Everything's fine.
All the NFC North, all of them, man. None of them made it to the NFC Championship games. Insane.
Hate to see it, but hey, I'd like to say there's always next year, but sad about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, looks like, to the Jets. So compensatory picks do not do it for what those guys are adding to the team. So anyways, moving into RBs here. So we are going to start with tier 1 here. And tier 1, shorter and sweeter than it has been in past iterations. Less players, but same number of assets that we had in tier 1 in previous iterations. And JP, go ahead and read who we have there.
Sure. Yeah, we got Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs here in the tier 1. Previously, Breece Hall was in this tier, but didn't perform as nearly as well as these guys. And these guys, they were the RB 2 and 3 in points per game this year. So they were phenomenal. Bijan just turned 23 and Gibbs is 22.8. So young studs.
And immediate question, I know in our discussion, we had talked about having our 101, the expectation of Ashton Genty here. I feel somewhat comfortable having him in this tier. I'd take either of these guys over him, but I think it's probably around I'd take a 26 second and Ashton Genty, the 101, probably for at least Bijan. Probably, possibly for Gibbs as well. How do you guys feel about that type of question conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair conversation. I just think with what we've actually seen from Gibbs and Bijan, I like the security there. They're still young. I think the expectation is that Janty will be there, and I think he is RB3 as soon as he's drafted. Just kind of hard for me to put them in the same tier personally quite yet.
Yeah, I'd probably put him here if he gets a landing spot like the Chargers or the Cowboys, one of these landing spots we're really excited about. The Vikings, I would love any of those. If he goes to the Raiders, I don't love the offense. He's still going to be a very, very useful fantasy option, but it really limits his ceiling. I see in that case, in that scenario, I'd probably keep him just behind these guys.
Yeah, I think what we learned just from last year, having MHJ, Marvin Harrison Jr., close to that tier 1 of wide receivers, and you're probably just better off taking the proven asset. I think the process move is probably best is to keep the proven commodity. Do love the flexibility of the 101 at this point, but cannot complain or blame you guys too much. Anything else we have to say about these guys? I think everyone knows they're superstar studs, and I think we are in more and better conversations in tier 2. David, do you mind reading that one for us?
Lana Chain, Saquon Barkley, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams, and the 103 through the 106 kind of spread out in this tier.
So we had a lot of discussion about this one. We talked this one out for hours, this whole episode between our Discord and our sleeper chat. And we had the couple guys here in Kyron Williams, first of all, I want to talk about that we were not sure about placing in this tier. JP, you were one of the voices that was more against that. Can you kind of talk about why you have Kyron a little bit lower than this tier?
Yeah, it's just a belief in the talent, and we've seen Kyron be relatively inefficient. Now, he's still been really, really good for fantasy. He was RB10 in points per game this year, but I think there are some question marks about if Stafford will retire. He said himself that he's going to think about it. I lean that he's probably back, but that is a question mark. He's not all that explosive. And I think that there's a chance that in a couple years' time, he's not a workhorse that we've seen. I think a large part of his fantasy production is just the fact that he's getting 80-90% of the work. And I think it's because they don't really have any other backs there that are phenomenal. I mean, Blake Corum, they drafted him and we were a little bit scared. And I think everybody just kind of has in the back of their mind, like, oh, this guy was a 5th-round pick. He might get his job taken to some degree at some point. But the other guys, I think, are just better talents.
And Brees Hall, we did see a hammer season from him 2 seasons ago. This year, not really that same hammer. Fringe RB1, high-end RB2 type of production that we saw right from him. At his young age, you still love to see that and have that in your roster. He's someone I'm a little bit interested in trying to target. If I could turn a 106 and a little bit into him in this rookie draft, I would love to try to do that. Is that something you guys is he a potential target if you can get him on the low end of this tier price as well?
Yeah, I think he's a good buy at the low end of this price here. I was a little on the fence. Initially, I had a Chain and Barkley in their own tier. I think I've come around to feeling comfortable about Brees here in tier 2. Like you said, the upside is definitely there. He's still pretty young. Just a lot of question marks about the Jets right now. They do have a coach, as we discussed. They just hired him the day that we're recording this. Not sure what it does for him, as he's a defensive-minded coach. But this draft, it is RB heavy, but if I can get a still young but proven RB for, instead of drafting Omarion Hampton or Caleb Johnson or whatever, I think that makes a ton of sense. So yeah, I would be interested in doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's got the combination of explosiveness, pass catching, and I think he's just all around well-rounded running back. And I mean, he's RB2 the season before with Zach Wilson as quarterback. I'm not exactly sure what went so wrong this year, but I still think that he's clearly got that in him somewhere.
And Saquon Barkley, I think, well, first of all, obvious advice on Saquon. If your team is not contending this year, we're taking any picks in this range. If you're getting the 4, 5, 6, we probably want a little sweetener on it. I'd trade Saquon for the 103, maybe the 104 entirely straight up. If I had to for the 105, 106, I think I'd try to instead pivot to wide receiver value personally at that point if that was the best I could get. It's hard to move RBs, but how confident are we, or what? We have a lot of older RBs we're going to talk about later in here. There are guys that are 29, 30, 31 that we're not that far off from him in production. He outproduced them, but he did not produce them by that much. Are we looking to try to capitalize into, not to spoil other running backs that are old, but Mixon, Henry, Kamara types of players? If we could get a 1-2 swap or a couple of seconds thrown on top of that, what is the process you guys are kind of taking if you have Saquon?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think he is the youngest in that group, or if not, he's at least very close. So I understand grouping him with those guys. He is a little past his prime as we think of for running backs, but he still, I think, has another year or two. I understand the usage makes people a little weary. We've had some bad luck with that going to the following year. So if I can get a 1-2 swap, especially if I'm confident that it's at least half a round, if not a full round of difference, I'm okay with that. Not sure I'd do it for a couple of seconds, though. It would definitely depend on the league settings and the roster for that.
Yeah, because when we're talking about a couple of seconds, I think Saquon, when you compare him to Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, I just think that Saquon's got at least one more year, maybe 2 or 3 more potentially than them. I mean, he still looks like he's in his prime. He's the best running back in all of football this year. He's RB1 in points per game. He's a true hammer, and he's just now turning 28. I could see him in his age 28 season, 29, 30, still be a guy that is super valuable. But for Kamara and Henry, for 2 seconds to take, a season or two of production away from that level, I don't think I'd quite do it. But the 1-2 swap, I think I would consider, as long as that first isn't super team first.
As long as I'm not offering it to you, huh?
Well, some rosters, I get it. Yeah, you're right.
All right. And of course, Achan, love what he's done at such a young age. Love to see the production he's had. Very confident that he will continue to produce as long as he is healthy. Moving on to tier 3, we have a handful of younger-ish running backs. James Cook, Bucky Irvings, Kenneth Walker III, Jonathan Taylor, and the 107 through the 109. First thing that stands out when I made this tier is I'm a little bit uncomfortable having Bucky Irving up here, but I think he belongs to be here. Do you guys feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, The way he finished the season, what his value is on the market right now, he's pretty much got to be in this tier, if you ask me.
He's 22 years old, so he's 2 years younger than the next youngest, which is Kenneth Walker. And from week 6 on, he was RB10 in points per game, and I don't really expect that to really change because it seems like he took over that role right around that time. Rashad White's still going to be there, kind of be a little bit of a thorn in the side, but I think it's probably best for Bucky Irving to not be a guy that's getting 25 carries a game, anyways.
Definitely saw some incredible efficiency from him splitting touches there. Now, there's one guy here, David. I know you are a bit lower on us than the consensus. Would you like to talk to us about why anybody that comes from the Big Ten that's not from Ohio State is just taboo to you?
Jonathan Taylor also came from the Big Ten, and I'm not low on him.
Okay, fine. You caught me.
And it's Kenneth Walker in here for me if I had to drop someone, and I was advocating for putting him in tier 4. We've got a new offensive coordinator coming in, so we're not exactly sure what they're going to do. Zach Charbonnet looked very good in his time leading the backfield with Walker out. I expect Walker to still lead this backfield. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Charbonnet eats into his workload enough that it limits his upside. And look, over Walker's 3 seasons, and he's kind of just been an RB2 kind of guy. Definitely someone you like having, but compared to these other guys, I would definitely take any of those 3 other players in this tier over him. Probably taking every pick in this tier over him as well.
Yeah, David was definitely the lower guy on Walker. We had quite the debate about him, but I just think from what he showed specifically this year with his pass catching is what really makes me want to keep him this tier because he had 53 targets, 46 receptions in 11 games. Now, health has been a little bit of an issue for him, but 46 receptions in 11 games, should he be pacing for 60 receptions? And I mean, I think he clearly has that upside. He showed it, and I think he's got double-digit touchdown upside. The offensive line, I think EPA per play this year was bottom 3. I know last year was a big question mark as well. Now, there's no guarantee that it's going to get better, but it's hard to remain that bad for a couple of years. So I think they're going to invest resources in there. Like I said, you can't guarantee that, but I just think that he's a really good player. He's RB12 in points per game, so back end guy there, and he's still just turned 24 years old as well.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you there. I think he's going to lead the backfield. I think he won that job last year with the new coaching staff. So whether or not he is able to maintain that role with the new offensive coordinator, I feel like I would take the bet that he can. Still young. I believe in the talent, explosive guy. So I'm excited there. James Cook, incredible season. Not too much more to talk about there. He's still young. And Jonathan Taylor, do you feel like he played his way back into this tier with how he played down the stretch? Would you have had them in this tier 6 weeks ago before his strong finish, guys? Because I don't think I would have.
No, I agree with you there because we were a little bit worried about his age and the pass catching there. The guy is just really darn good.
Took a little while for us to come around and look at his complete body of work this season, but he quietly was RB7, I think, in points per game.
Won me some chips.
I think he definitely belongs right in this tier.
Yeah, he's added a few $100s to my bank account for a couple Dynasty championships. I love you, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, first of all, buddy, you're a Badger, so in my heart already. But yeah, he had a heck of a run down the stretch as well.
Now, with this pick range here, I guess that would probably be guys like Caleb Johnson, maybe Travion Henderson. David, do you think that those guys could surpass guys in this tier for you? I mean, I know Kenneth Walker maybe, but
yeah, I mean, obviously landing spot and draft capital is very important, but those two, Hampton, probably the 3 with the best chance of either being in or above this tier. Probably hard for those guys to feel confident in tier 2, but you get Hampton early second to a good spot, maybe back into the first. I've been hearing probably not because he's a running back, but then you've got Travion with his explosiveness. Caleb Johnson also looked great. So I think all 3 of those guys probably end up somewhere between tier 3 and 2.
Let's say one of those 3 goes to Dallas. Justin, how are you going to feel about them in relation and compared to the guys in tier 3? Would you consider tier 2 for a Dallas landing spot?
I would say anybody taken with day 1 or 2 draft capital by Dallas, I would probably prefer over these guys. Not saying I would trade these guys for them straight up. It would just depend on market value. I'd look to get a process deal if I could. But I think any of these guys at this cash price or the 107 to 109, if I have the ability, if I have the RB room build that I typically do, I'd be happy to try to liquidate one of these guys, get younger. I know it's like Bucky Irving, how much younger can you get? He just came in last year. He's still on the younger side, but he might be the only one I'm not really making sure to do that with. KW3 Taylor, James Cook have all been in the league a few years. I think I'd very happily take the chance on re-rolling for a rookie running back. I might even take a wide receiver with the pick if I got into this pick range, especially if it's the 107, 108. We get down to the 109, I'm starting to really think about it a little bit more, especially with the Penn State running backs going back. I think this draft class is decreasing a little bit in value and people were already not that excited about it. But in general, this is a tier I feel like I'm pretty happy to try to re-roll it if I can get especially the 107, 108, unless I feel like they're a pivotal part of my team. Like if I have no other running backs on my roster, I might try to keep like a Taylor or a Cook or an Irving as like an anchor RB. But do you guys kind of agree with that philosophy, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I do. And I think that any of those three, if they go round two to Dallas, they'll probably be in the 103 to 106 range that we have in tier two. Travion, might be more the 106, 105 there because of how he's viewed as a prospect. But yeah, I think that's what they will be if it's round two to Dallas, because that offense is really good for running backs.
I think it also depends on where your team's at. If I'm, a championship contender and that's where my sights are set, kind of hard to trade a guy like Jonathan Taylor for an unknown. I definitely could be swayed depending on landing spot and draft capitals. So a lot of it depends, a lot to unpack still. Yeah, if I'm competing, I probably want Jonathan Taylor unless it's like top 50 draft capital to a really good spot. And then process probably says take the reroll.
Yeah, I get that. But if I'm getting 4, maybe 5 years younger, I just think that Dallas, it's so hard for the guy not to be like a top 15 fantasy back. And if Taylor does see a little bit of regression, he's more of a back end RB1. So, but I definitely get it though.
Bucky Irving's incredibly interesting. He could be a top 12 running back a la Alvin Kamara type of efficiency. Doesn't matter if he's thunder to lightning, split backfield. I think he's the type of guy that could be just a top 12 running back for 4 or 5 years because of his just elusiveness, pass catching role, etc. So he's definitely, I think, to me, I'm most interested in this tier. But Jonathan Taylor, to me, I think very likely could be one of the most, I think you could say make a case for top 3, easily top 5 most talented running back, pure runner in the NFL. Just a phenomenal player, fun to watch. I've been watching him for a while, and I think it's a very interesting, it's an interesting conversation because you could very easily see him, like JP said, revert to a low end RB1, high end RB2 type of guy for the next 3 years. It's like between RB11 and 17, nice player to have. You love to have him, but he's not really helping you win individual games like a Saquon Barkley is. But the other thing I could see with how he finished, finally getting healthy, he's had some health issues in the last few years. Maybe A. Rich is figuring it out. Maybe he's not, but at the very least, he opens up the game for Taylor. I don't think it's impossible to see him finishing top 5 for the next 2-3 seasons. So he's an interesting one. I'm not really sure how to handle him. So I certainly would not want to get rid of him in every case because I do see him having that high end upside. Do you kind of agree, David, that he has that potential at least?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I would hang on to him. I mean, I don't know that he has RB1 overall again in his, it's probably in his range of outcomes. Just going to be very hard for him to actually hit that. But I do think top 5 is reasonable. The other thing I'll say is the shallower the league, the more likely I am to reroll just because of that upside thing. Taylor has a chance at getting to the point we were just talking about, but I do think back into RB1 is probably more realistic for the next few years. So if I can take a shot on hitting a home run, like I said, in the shallower the league, the more you need that home run hitting ability. So,
all right. And JP, do you mind reading out tier 4 for us next? I think we've beaten that one like a dead horse.
Yeah, we only got a couple of guys with Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown, and we have picks 110 through 112 in this tier.
I believe the podcast almost died over this tier. Is that not? Do I remember that incorrectly from the group chat?
Yeah, I think I submitted my 2 weeks around this point.
This one was a difficult one for us. So originally we had discussed having this as part of a mega tier with tier 5, and David really was pushing for both of these guys being separate from the group in tier 5. So please let us know in the comments below how you feel about that, especially once we get there. Chase Brown is a difficult one. I offered him straight up in some leagues, in one league, for a player we have in tier 5 a couple weeks ago, and did agree that I think I'd have him a tier above that guy now. So David, give us your elevator pitch for how you convinced us to get Chase Brown up here because I do think that's the right process.
Look, there's a lot of risk with Chase Brown. It's kind of like Kyron Williams last year. He's a day 3 pick a little later. Someone we're a little shaky on our confidence. But when you look at what he did on the field, he was excellent. Week 4 on, he was RB6 with 18.3 points per game. Still under 25 at this point. On a great offense. Like, even if they do add someone, he still has the lion's share of the workload, and he's still, at worst, an RB2 kind of play. Obviously, like I said, there's some risk involved if they decide they really need to replace him or pair someone really explosive with him, or another like Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Williams, or something. If they take one of those guys, I'm a little worried. They wait until the third, and they add someone who's solid but not great. They probably need someone behind him, so that wouldn't surprise me. But like I said, what he's done on the field kind of trumps everything about him as a prospect, in my opinion. So I'm definitely interested, especially at this price.
I think if they take a running back in round 2, I'd be very, very scared for Chase Brown. If it's round 3, I think there's a little bit more open-mindedness to him being still very good, because Kyron Williams, we saw it last year, Corn went in round 3, and there's no guarantee that Chase Brown, even in that scenario, is the alpha like Kyron was, but it is possible for sure. And we just saw from week 4 on, he was RB6 in points per game. He's 24.8 years old. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities that he is Kyron Williams next year, and he's in tier 2 right now. So there is that upside for sure. And the offense is phenomenal. We have security with Joe Burrow being there for a long time, and a lot of downside too. He could fall to tier 6, by this time, 3-4 months from now.
I think the biggest difference between him and Kyron, which should be pointed out, is we're qualifying Chase Brown from week 4 on, and it was RB6. I think Kyron was RB2 last year, so probably a little different on the ceiling, but very similar in the outlook from last offseason to this offseason. Just maybe not quite the ceiling that Kyron had.
Are you paying the 110, David, if it's offered for you?
Probably depends on my team, but I think if I thinking RB with that 110 anyways, I think I prefer Chase Brown. I might try and, slow play it so I can see if they do add anyone. But if I get pressured into making a decision right now, I'd probably do it most of the time.
I do also think that is a deal that could get done today, but that is a deal that very likely you don't have the ability to slow play it. I think if he survives the draft, even if it's, so like you said, 3rd round guy, we don't believe in that much. It's more of a complimentary piece, or doesn't get anyone drafted till 4th, 5th, something like that, which with how bad their defense is, I don't think is impossible that they don't take anyone on day 2. Like, they have bigger needs. It's a deep class. I could definitely see a day, a 4th round running back being the solution. So I think it's a very solid bet. Originally, JP and I both had him below this. We had him in a different tier. We had him in the tier with tier 5, but the upside that he has for longevity, because he's got 2 more years under contract, right? This was his 2nd year off the rookie deal. I think it was a 5th round draft pick. So 2 more years on that rookie deal, 2 more years of potential production like this. And I don't think he's going to be the guy who commands a crazy type of a contract. So who knows? He could stay there even longer, But 2 years of production for the 110, like at running back, I think you are pretty much guaranteed to get 2 years of some kind of production out of him. Like, either they're going to draft or somebody else. I don't think they're going to draft anyone too early because their defense is their need. So he's going to be in a timeshare. And I think because of the fact that he knows the offense, he's trusted there, he'll get the majority of the work at least this year, and probably might stick around that next year as well. Or they don't draft anyone of name, and then maybe they do the following year. So I just think it's such high upside what he can do for you. He got me into the playoffs in a couple of leagues. I had no business being in there, and I think he could do the same thing again. And historically speaking, 110 to 112 is a not good pick. That's a bad pick, right? That's the type of pick that you want to roll into the future, right? So if you're not rolling into the future, if you're buying a running back, that means you're not rebuilding. You're trying to compete, and he's a guy that I think can win a championship for you, potentially. There's risk, but it's a swing. It's a home run swing.
Yeah, I think if you're attaching a player name to the 110, you're probably looking at Igbuka, Travion, Tyler Warren, one of those guys in that range. And I think by the time 111, 112 is when I started to get a little bit more nervous about this class. 110 is hard for me to send for Chase Brown. I'd probably try to do it if I have a 112, I definitely would. 111, probably. The 110 is tough for me, but I definitely understand the upside case. And like you said, Justin, the hit rate isn't phenomenal for the 110, but I might pivot somewhere else and get a receiver for the 110. Josh Jacobs, initially when we talked about putting him here, I kind of didn't realize how high he really was in points per game. He was RB8 with 17.2, and you might think, oh, I don't remember him being quite that great. I think he was much better down the stretch is the reason that is, but he's about to turn 27. It's very similar to Jonathan Taylor to me, but he's 1 year older. and was just marginally worse. So I don't know. I think they're going to keep him around though. It's a good offense, and he's probably going to be a top 12 running back again next year. I was kind of surprised when I saw RB8.
I would certainly prefer him to Brown because I think he's a much safer, sure thing.
Yeah.
I'm much more willing to pay the 110 for Jacobs than Brown if I could get either.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on my RB room build because I think Brown does have more upside and a little more longevity. But boy, does Matt LaFleur love him some Josh Jacobs. I think there's about a 0% chance they move on. I know his contract could be, they could move on from him this year due to his contract, but I just don't see that happening. He was the focal point of the offense. When he went, the Packers offense went. When he did not, their offense did not. And as a fan, it was almost frustrating at times how often we would run. But then you're like, oh no, don't run on this play. And then he gains like 8 yards. And you're like, okay, run on this play. So I think his role is locked in for the next year or two. And with his age, I think you should expect similar production.
Cannot disagree with that. Going on to tier 5, we have CMC, Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Chuba Hubbard. I argued for him being here, but it felt gross, and an early second. This was one of the more interesting tiers to talk about. Starting out with the first name we read here, CMC. JP, you made, and I do understand the case for it, and there might even be a roster or two where I do try to make an offer. You argued, that especially the 112, 111 for CMC type of range and what it could do for you. Go ahead and make that case for the audience, please.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really unfortunate year this year. I mean, we did not even know about the Achilles coming into the year. Then he's out for the first 8 weeks. That was very shocking. And then he goes out week 13 as well. So we didn't really have him very long. When he's been healthy, which that is an if he's going to be healthy, that's probably the only thing that really has us concerned. He's 28.6, so I don't think the age is like a massive question yet. He was RB1, and it was with 24 points per game last year. That would have easily been RB1 this year. Saquon was at 22. So I think just the value of replacement for him is just incredible. We've seen the year before, he was RB2. He's been a top 2 RB in fantasy 4 different years, and that's when he's healthy. When he's not healthy, we've seen it go back and forth. Some years you just can't predict it, honestly. But I think at this price point, if it's a back of a first, you might be getting top 5 RB production potentially for 2 seasons, and I think that's really, really worth it. Even though there is risk, there's no guarantee. Can't guarantee that whatsoever. But I still feel pretty confident in him for at least another year or two, even though it is scary. I get it.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how we can be confident in him. Like, if I'm asset rich, this is a great swing to take. I'd love to trade for him for a second or maybe a second plus and just hope for the best. But it's not just like, a pull of a muscle or a bruise or something. From what I know, at least tendonitis doesn't just like go away. You can manage it and it can not affect you for quite a while. But it can come back at any time. And I think the 49ers, learned their lesson with him getting re-injured. Even if he is healthy, there's going to be some significant load management. If he's healthy and playing, he's still going to be a stud, probably an RB1. I'm just not sure he has like the breaking fantasy season left in his tank.
Let me ask you guys this. If he was guaranteed to play 2 full seasons, which obviously can't do, where would his value be in rookie picks when you're looking at our tier board here?
Like 2 full healthy seasons with a heavy workload, or the workload that I project?
Say 90% of what he's used.
Like tier 2, maybe 3.
Right, and that's just the upside. I think at this point where the hit rates are a little lower, I just think it's worth it to me just for that pure upside.
Yeah, I guess I would just argue that while the upside might not be there for Joe Mixon and Alvin Kamara of CMC peak ceiling, the probable range of outcomes I think is above the, like, if we were to take like a bell curve distribution of outcomes that we expect for the players and like multiply the percentage chance by like the fantasy point expectations for the different outcomes, I feel like I'm more confident in Joe Mixon and Kamara over the next 2 years than I am CMC, even though the high end range of outcomes for CMC is higher. I mean, those two guys, I feel more confident in their durability. Of course, they're older, they're RBs, anything can happen. It's a dangerous game. Monty, I feel close to similar to that argument. I think maybe it's pretty fair between Monty and CMC. It just depends on if I really want to potentially. In a start 9, I'd prefer CMC. In a start 11, I'd probably prefer the certainty of the consistency of what I expect from Monty. And I could consider taking Henry over CMC as well. If I think I can win next year, I think I'd take Henry over CMC 8 times out of 10, to be honest with you. I'd wait. I'd try to wait until he doesn't retire. So if he doesn't retire, which I haven't heard any expectations that he will, then I'm taking Henry over CMC if I expect to win next year.
I guess it just depends on my running back room for that. If I can afford to miss, then I would take CMC. But if you're trading for one of these guys at this point in the offseason, at least you maybe can't afford to miss on a running back. So I get that thought process. I do think while the floor is very low for CMC, such that like he might not even play again or never effectively again, the upside is there. Also, even in a timeshare, he should be pretty solid. I don't know. I think they're about even. If I get any sort of plus to go either direction, I would do that. And I do think I agree with Montgomery. And Chuba's interesting. I mean, we haven't really talked about him because he's kind of the odd man out as the youngest guy of the group and the least established. But like, he's been really good. He's like 25 and a half. So I don't know. I think tearing down from these guys to Chuba, you're not really tearing down, you're moving within a tier. But if you can pick up a little plus to go to Chuba, I think that makes a ton of sense for most rosters. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, he was RB 13 this year, and the offense was pretty rough at some points. I think the end of the year, we saw the offense get a little bit better. If the offense does take that step, we saw its potential at the end of the year. He could be a top 10 running back because I don't think we're expecting really Jonathan Brooks to play this year. If it is, then it's the back end of the year. For a second torn ACL, it was in December as well, I believe. So yeah, I think he could be top 10 potentially, and does not have the name value of any of the guys in this tier, that's for sure.
I think he might be the guy I'm most interested in. There aren't many rosters where I don't think I would buy him for an early second. I just think he's the type of guy that I think will be around for a little bit. Yeah, they extended him there. Whether or not he's going to consistently be this role or not, I think it's pretty much guaranteed next year. I cannot foresee a world in which they spend day 2 draft capital on a running back again after just extending him. I think they take a guy in round 4 or 5 for depth, if even not later. And you get a year of what should be about RB1 production, and then a year after that of what I think should be RB2 production, followed by another year of RB2 production, probable with the contract he's got. He's very interesting. Him and Monty are like the two guys in here that I'm most interested in buying because of how ageist I am. But the old guys in this tier, I think if you can get them for that early second, I think that is a beautiful contending move at this point of the offseason. I am very interested in trying for any of those guys.
I think you're a little bit more confident in Chuba after this year just because of with Brooks. I think there's more question marks, but I mean, it's still possible that he could be an RB2.
I think it'll be a timeshare after this year. That's what we saw when they originally brought him back. Of course, they were ramping him up slowly, but I think they like him. So, and even if it's just 1 year for an early second of a young guy who's, as such, being young, less likely to get injured than the other guys in this group, although you can never really predict injury fully, I think, there's definitely a correlation between age and injury. Trust me, getting old sucks, kids. Don't do it. So, David, who in here, if you had the 201, you could get any of these guys, which one would you be most interested in buying? I know you hate to say players, you love to say give me a plus anyway, but I just want to put you on the spot with one question before we move on.
It is a little roster dependent. If I can afford to miss, like I said, I'll take CMC. Most cases, I think probably Chuba, honestly. If I'm really contending and my window's closing shut soon, though, I could see trying to get one of these veterans. This is a pretty solid tier for the price we have listed. I wouldn't be surprised if you actually have to add a little to your second to get these guys, but I just don't think it's at the point where I'm spending a first on them, which is kind of why we've landed on this tier and this price. So I think if I can miss, I'll go CMC. If not, I'm going to go Chuba.
And JP, I guess I'll ask you the same question just because I think this is one we talked the most about.
Yeah, it's CMC for me. He's just the one guy that can bring home a championship, not just on his own, but he's that kind of guy that could carry you there on his back.
If my contending window is ending, it's Henry. So I feel like this is my last real chance to win a championship with this roster. And if it's not, I'm going to actually go Monty over Hubbard just because I know in 2 years, I feel confident, barring catastrophic injury, that he still has the same role he has today.
Yeah, I'm a little bit lower on Monty. I looked, and the Lions, they scored the most points since 2018, and I just expect regression there. And he is good. He's one of the best running backs in the league if the guy in front of him gets hurt, honestly. I mean, Zach Charbonnet, he's right up in there, but Montgomery already has a role carved out. So he's RB16 on Keep Trade Cut right now, and I think it's about appropriate, but he doesn't excite me nearly as much as you guys.
And David, can you go ahead and now that we've beaten another tier like a dead horse, read tier 6 for us real quick.
Tyrone Tracy, Tony Pollard, James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, and a mid-second. Kind of just a tier of I mean, Tracy's probably the most interesting.
For
I
sure.
guess my question for him based on his age is, do we see this more like a Rashad White kind of thing where probably not hard to find an upgrade and they probably take the work from him eventually? Or do we think Tracy keeps the job and we're just not that high on him? Giants offense kind of sucks. I don't know. He was hard to place for me.
I think he was slightly more impressive as a runner than Rashad White, and he's got the receiving upside as well. So I really do like him. It's just I do feel like that they do spend day two capital, but you can never say that for sure. I mean, I think it's probably somewhat of a similar conversation to Chase Brown, but on a much less explosive offense here. Just would you take the upside swing, Justin? What do you think the odds are that the Giants take a running back in the day two of the draft?
I mean, they have a lot of needs on that team, especially if they take a quarterback round one. I'd like to think that the best choice with an early second round then is either offensive line or wide receiver. And then we're talking about the beginning of the third, assuming they just have their normal array of picks. Taking RB there is possible, but again, that's a team with a lot of needs. They kind of have found money here. I think it's more, I'd say 30% chance. I think the smart move, wait, they're not smart, it's the Giants, 50% chance. Yeah, but I would say about a 30% chance. So I think he's a good bet too. But then again, I think a fourth round guy in this deep of a draft class could do the Bucky Irving from last year because correct me if I'm wrong, Bucky, fourth round draft pick. I could see something very similar, even if it is a fourth round draft pick. So I think when we say mid second, he's on the 204, price point here that I'd consider paying the 203, the 202, especially closer to rookie draft time, even potentially if they drafted somebody that, and as tiers solidify. I just think it's really important to remember last year's draft class was such an outlier where we were really happy with up until even potentially like the 206 where you could get a Leggett or a Pearsall, right? Because of the 6 quarterbacks. So mid seconds, early seconds, I think we're a little skewed on our perceptions of them from last year, even though we're trying not to be. So what I'm trying to say is I think he's probably my favorite or tied for favorite, player in this tier.
Yeah, I think one other thing that's worth mentioning is, at least for me and Justin, I think JP's kind of come around on this a bit too. Our process at this point in the offseason isn't really to go out and buy running backs. So these pick values might be a little depressed just from that. I think if you're selling, you might want to go a little higher than what we have in these tiers. Maybe not the first few, but certainly here in these second round rookie picks that we're talking about. But again, it's about patience. Like if you can wait for Tracy, I'd rather wait and make sure he survives the draft and pay a little more, at least on most teams. But if I have the assets and I can take a swing on him, or like we said in the last round, McCaffrey, if I can take a couple swings and afford to miss, this is probably a good time to do it. But, most dynasty teams don't have that luxury.
And kind of coming to like last offseason and things like I did that I think were mistakes as I was buying Zamir White, for example. Tracy has actually shown, I think, a lot of very positive things on the NFL field, a lot of explosiveness, multiple 100-yard games, he can ball. So I do think as far as like worst case scenarios, of course, he just gets his job stolen from a stud rookie RB, but he can ball. So like I do think like this type of guy is not a terrible upside swing if you want to take it. But like David said, I definitely agree that I would rather wait because we know everybody here. The only one that I don't want to wait on is Chase Brown potentially because I think he goes up to like the 106, 105 price point if he survives the draft. And the difference between the 110 and the 203 and the 110 and the 105, like I think it's worth taking that risk. But on Tracy, if his price goes up to the 201 from the 204, I'm willing to probably pay more to be safe. Like David said, that's a beautiful point, David. I really appreciate you making that.
Yeah, and I think he's definitely not Zamir White. You guys, if you guys listening heard early in the offseason, I was the biggest Zamir White hater, and that's because he was not explosive and not a pass catcher in a bad offense. So not a great combination. I think Tracy's the opposite outside of maybe the offense. But the receiving ability there, just what he can do on one play, breaking off a big gain. And I remember hold it up, the Seattle game was when he broke out. He had 18 carries for 129 yards. I remember seeing that every single one of his carries went for positive yards. And that's really, really rare, especially for a guy who converted to a running back from wide receiver. I think he is really good. But moving on to other guys in this tier, they actually were very, very similar when I looked at their points per game. You have James Conner as 15.9. Dobbins at 14.8, Aaron Jones at 14.2, and Pollard's at 12.5. They're all on a similar range here. I mean, we know what happened with Pacheco too. Is Pacheco somebody that is worth buying low on because of what we saw early in the year? And I honestly, I think in the back end of the year, he was just not as explosive. He wasn't his normal self. It's the same thing as Tracy, though. Are they going to bring somebody else in?
I mean, of course, Pacheco was coming off of, I believe it was a bone in the leg. And when you see someone coming off an injury like that, you don't expect him to. I mean, it's possible he recoups some value in the playoffs. You know, if he's healthier than he was, he just had 2 weeks off, right? So we could definitely see him have a strong playoffs to recoup some value. It's going to be impacted by the draft. If I could buy him today for a 205, 6, 7, I probably would on many rosters because I think it's a fair swing at that point. I would be shocked if the Chiefs don't draft potentially 2 running backs this year. Certainly one. I don't know when it's going to be. I could see a day 2. I wouldn't be surprised if they get a 3rd-round guy. But I do think Pacheco is good. I think that they really like him. I think they know how to use him. He knows the offense. He knows the scheme. So I think he's still going to have a decent year next year, but they will draft a replacement. So at this range on that offense, we just saw Kareem Hunt do it. And I don't think anyone thinks Kareem Hunt is that good right now. He was at one point a phenomenal player. Now he's just a wily vet running back, right? So I'm very interested in buying him. I'm very interested in buying James Conner. I'm very interested in buying Pollard at this price point. Dobbins and Aaron Jones, I think, are a little bit riskier. I'd buy Jones, but I'm a little concerned about where he might land. And Dobbins, to me, I think I'm probably just taking another offseason where I'll have no exposure to him at this price.
So if they had very similar points per game, what makes you like Jones more than Dobbins right now?
Have you seen Dobbins' injury history? I just don't believe in him. I refuse to believe. I will never believe. I'm like Fox Mulder. I want not to believe, though. So I'm the opposite of Fox Mulder.
What school did he go to again? Is that why, Justin?
It is actually, yes. I do hate all Buckeyes. I hate you too, David.
Thanks, buddy.
I got you, cuz.
I think I'll start with the Pacheco topic because I do think that's very interesting. He was the one that kind of was the hardest to place in this range for me. I do think buying low on him with a mid-second value is probably a reasonable process move. We saw, I think this time last year, he was an RB1, I think back end, but like RB10-ish. The value could be there if he proves healthy. Just worried about, like, Kareem Hunt took most of the work when he came back. And if it's because of the injury, then, that's fair. But like Justin said, they could easily draft someone, and that someone could take a lot of work from him. I'm nervous about it. I think I wouldn't mind buying low for a couple of teams just to have a couple of shares because I actually don't have any right now.
Same.
I'm definitely very nervous about him. As far as the old point producers here, kind of all the same. I guess Dobbins isn't necessarily old, but his body is a little bit older than his age. I think all 4 are fair buys for mid-second. But again, at this point in the offseason, I'm going to try to wait if I can.
Yeah, I mean, and Dobbins, he has the least amount of receiving upside, I'll say. But personally, from the eye test, I thought he looked really good this year. And there is at least, I mean, if he does come back to the Chargers, that might be the best landing spot for him personally. Maybe the Cowboys if they're interested. But yeah, there's not a lot of other spots that he can go that's better than the Chargers.
Sure are not. And for what it's worth, I just want to say one last bit on those veterans. I do think it is worth noting on James Conner and Pollard, there is a very low chance that there's a high draft capital rookie taken this year on those 2. So if you do want to buy somebody from this tier at this point, I do think those guys are the least likely to take any hits from the NFL draft.
Yeah, I mean, Tyjae Spears, established backup, and Trey Benson was a round 2 pick. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, our 7th tier we have here is Jonathan Brooks, Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, DeAndre Swift, Brian Robinson, and Travis Etienne, as well as a late second. I know you want to talk about Justin, and it's the Etienne of it all. Why don't we just go ahead and start with him? And why don't you like him?
So I think David made the strongest point that I also feel very confident about. If wherever we have him, I don't think he should be here. I mean, I guess I don't disagree with the price point that much, but I just think he should be in the same tier as Tank Bigsby because I would take any plus. You give me a third to go between Bigsby and ETN, I would do it. I don't know about like a 312. At this point, when I say give me a third, I kind of mean like a 26 third or a mid 25 third at the very least. So it's just, I don't think he's that great. I think he's a solid NFL running back. I think if he was a star player, hear me out here, he'd be doing star player things on the field this year, right? The previous year, he was incredibly buoyed by touchdown production. He wasn't really that great. That's why he was so good. I know he just had this amazing season, but it was touchdown buoy. So like he averaged what, like 8-ish points a game? I think it was 7.8 even. It was abysmal. It was terrible. He got his job pretty much taken from by Tank Bigsby. I think Tank Bigsby established kind of he should be the goal line back later into the season. Like I saw him, getting some of that work later on. At the very least, it's a pretty close to 50-50 timeshare. If I was to buy somebody, I think especially if I do think ETN's a little bit more expensive in most leagues just because of the name value, I'd much rather buy Tank at this point for a comparable price. So for that reason, I'm out, brother.
Yeah, and outside of Jonathan Brooks, who's only down here because he just tore his ACL, I just think he clearly has the most upside out of anybody in this tier. Like he was RB3, like you said, he had a higher touchdown total, but it was 11, so it's not like it was a crazy amount like we see from somebody like David Montgomery. But I mean, he had 58 receptions too, so I get it. It was gross this year, but I think there's at least some optimism now that they moved on from the coaching staff that whoever brings in the new scheme, maybe he fits it well, whether it's, zone gap. I don't know which one he excels better in, but I think that nobody has the upside that he does right now. And I think he's probably worth somewhere around like the 208, 209. If you get to at least offer that, I think to be able to pry him away.
I mean, hear me out here. Tank Bigsby has the same upside, in my opinion.
I don't know. Maybe. It's not as explosive, and I don't think he's quite the pass catcher, but Bigsby did look good. And I will say Bigsby looked much, much worse in the back half of the year. He had that hot stretch there that got us excited about him, but he's a fine, good handcuff, I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this. I like buying into uncertainty on at least what I think should be average, if not above average offenses. There's definitely uncertainty in that backfield. I wouldn't mind having some Etienne and some Tank Bigsby. Don't have much conviction about which one I expect to have more work. They could even bring someone in. We just don't know right now. We don't know who their coach is going to be. We don't know who their GM is going to be. They just moved on from Balky today. So a lot of question marks there, which does mean some upside. One thing I just want to mention here before we talk about more players in this tier, I was heavily advocating for Zach Charbonnet to be in this tier, partially because of how I feel about the uncertainty in that backfield, also because of what he showed in the time Walker was out. I'm going to assume you guys didn't want him in here because you're a little more bullish on Walker than I am.
I just had a busy day and did not reply to that message. Apologize. So we did discuss, and we just decided not to redo the tiers, the graphic here earlier. I would say we should add him to this tier because I would prefer him to ETN. I would prefer him to probably, team dependent. I might prefer him to Brooks, to be honest with you, in certain situations. If I have Kenneth Walker, for sure, I'd prefer him over Brooks. Prefer him over, I think, Harris, just because I think Harris is who he is. I'd prefer him over probably Swift because I can find 10 points per game from the RB position from Amir Abdullah, whoever Amir Abdullah is next year. So I don't really love running Swift out there, besides the fact that I know he might have a job if someone gets drafted. I don't know. He definitely belongs here, David. I 100% agree.
Yeah, and the reason I don't have him here, I mean, he's probably one of the best handcuffs you could have for sure. I think he's a pretty good player. But everybody else in this tier outside of Brooks, I think.
And ETN.
I think you can put them in your starting lineup and at least have some confidence. Of course, ETN, we don't know. We'll have to see what his role is for the first few weeks. But Charbonnet, I just think that he's firmly behind Walker. I mean, David, you're right that there's a chance that it could be 50-50 split with the new offensive coordinator coming in. I personally put the odds pretty low, but I mean, it is at least possible. And he's probably the best handcuff out there outside of Montgomery, who's not really an exclusive handcuff. So I don't hate it, but I just value all of the running backs in the tier above Charbonnet personally right now, except for maybe Brian Robinson. I'm a big Brian Robinson hater.
You sure do, brother. You sure do. I think Brian Robinson is probably the person I'm most interested in this tier because whether this is right or not, I feel most confident that he is going to have the same role he had this year next year. I think one of two things is going to happen. Eckler comes back, plays the same role. B-Rob is kind of the between the 20s and goal line guy. Like he's the running downs back. Well, Eckler is the passing downs back, but I think he's still going to be a timeshare back doing what he does in a phenomenal offense. Jaden Daniels is the truth. He opens up running lanes. And Brian Robinson he's going to get you 12 points a game, and he'll score you 17 or 18 if he scores a touchdown. So,
yeah, B-Rob was the one that definitely is the most interesting to me here. I was an advocate for putting him a tier higher. I think, especially when you look at his market value, he's keep trade cut RB19 right now. So, people like him. But you guys made pretty solid points when we were actually just looking at the numbers. He's really not that different from the guys in this tier. At the end of the day, I was okay leaving him here. If I have to buy someone, that would definitely be my target here. I don't think you'll get him for a late second, though.
Yeah, and I don't really know why you guys like him much more than Ramondre or Najee. I guess I can maybe see it over Ramondre. I don't think he's all that great, but Najee I think has more upside as a pass catcher. I think Warren is a little more involved than Eckler. I think Warren's a little bit better at this point. I think they're a year apart in age, and Najee at least has upside to go somewhere that's somewhat exciting. And Najee actually he was 12 points per game to Brad Robinson's 11.4. Marginal difference. So they weren't really much different. I just think we've seen more from Najee.
Yeah, Najee, we've talked about this before. He's a bell cow back. He can handle all the work. If Najee goes on a moderate deal to the Chargers or the Cowboys, he's up in tier 5, right? He's worth an early second, maybe a late first, right? Even potentially in some leagues you'll see a move for, right? But I also think very much so in the range of outcomes for Najee is RB28. And I think that's probably what I would bet is somewhere between RB22 and RB28 is going to be Najee's outcome this year. If I had to bet, I'd put that as the most likely outcome. And I think just mediocrity is what we've seen a lot of from him. He's not efficient. He's just durable.
Brian Robinson's kind of same though, right? I think Brian Robinson's right around RB 28 in points per game right now this year.
I think my biggest case between those two, and I know this isn't the Bible or anything, but Keep Trade Cut has Najee Harris at RB32. And like I said, Brian Robinson's at RB19.
Yeah.
So even if it's not that far apart in everyone's minds, I guess most people have Robinson ahead of Najee to the point where you could get a pretty solid plus, maybe not a second, because, well, we're talking about these guys being barely worth a second at this point. I think you get a solid third to move between them easily. And I don't know if I would pay that to move, but if I could get that to move from Robinson to Najee, I'd be happy to do that.
I think I'd take Robinson over Najee and a third, to be honest with you. Maybe it's bad process. Maybe I shouldn't do it. I think now that I say it out loud, I would take Najee in the third, but I don't know. Everyone in the here scares me. Ramondre, we saw Gibson getting starts over him later in the season at times just because he was in the doghouse. I know it's a new coaching staff. I do think Ramondre is better than Gibson, but I just don't think he's that good. I've never thought DeAndre Swift was that good. ETN, I've already talked trash about him and just Brooks' injury. Like, it's a dog water tier, guys. RVs get rough.
David was a big advocate for having Brooks here, if not a little bit higher. But do you want to talk about why? And do you think there's value insulation there? Is that a big part of it?
That's definitely part of it. It's unlikely he plays next year. I think a year from now, maybe like a year and a few months when he's getting those workout videos in, we're going to have some people remember the hype on him. And I looked at the Dynasty Daddy trade database just kind of to see what was going on while we were discussing him. Very shocked, but I saw 2 trades for 26 firsts that happened last week. So like the market's still there in some places at least. And a year from now, probably going to be at least where it's at, if not hotter. I don't love buying him on every team, but I'm happy to stash him. I think in most cases, as long as I'm not competing where I have a late second to burn, I'll buy him if I can put him on, as long as I have a few IR spots as well. If it's a really shallow roster, it's hard to just buy someone who knows not going to play next year. He was the first running back taken last year. He was, I think, probably around 110 in most drafts last year. So I still think that the upside is there. He's still young enough. A lot of question marks, so it's really hard to come back from 2 injuries like that. At this price point, it's worth the upside shot.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it on every roster, but a roster with flexibility would absolutely do it, right? Like if I'm asset poor and I'm competing, I'm not doing it. But if I'm asset poor and I'm rebuilding, I would absolutely do it. So certainly understand the case for there. Definitely prefer me Trevor Etienne. Travis Etienne. Oh, don't get me started. I love those legacy players. But anyways, anything else you guys want to talk about in this tier or outside of the tiers?
Yeah, I want to ask David a question just to bring in a little bit of rookie talk. I know you're higher on one of these guys, more higher on the one than the other, but would you have Judkins and Scatabo in that tier 5 right now?
Judkins, I might even put up into tier 4. I'm a little higher on him than you are. Scatabo, I have a few more question marks than I do with Judkins. I think come rookie draft season, I could see them a lot more even. We're not positive how Scatabo is going to work out. Some people have him as high as RB2. Some people think he's never going to really have, like a featured role in a backfield. So there's just a lot more question marks for me, but I love him. He's a lot of fun. He's a great prospect. I'm just a lot more confident in Judkins at this point in the process.
David, would it change your mind at all if I told you Scatabo has that dog in him?
Oh, I know he's got that dog in him, man. He's, like I said, he's a lot of fun to watch, and I do really enjoy him, and I hope that this process goes really well for him. I hope he gets good draft capital and tests well. I'm not positive yet. And like I said, I feel a lot more confident in Judkins.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk a lot more about rookies, in the next couple of months. But yeah, Scatterbo, somebody I love. I just think how tough he is on the goal line, the missed tackles force he can create, and he has the most receiving yards of any RBs in this class. I just think his upside, I personally think it's really high, and I think it's higher than Judkins probably, but Judkins probably feel a little bit safer with right now because, like you said, some people have him RB2, and some people say he's not good. And I feel like some people, it's because he came out of nowhere, say that. I don't know. I think the guy's good.
He definitely good. I'll agree with you there.
And I guess the other two running backs I like are Dylan Sampson and Devin Neal. I'd probably put them in tier 6, maybe just behind Tyron Tracy. He's kind of the clear guy there. I've seen a lot of Devin Neal hype lately.
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing like a startup with rookies involved today, I'm probably going to be a little more cautious. But I think by the end of this process, that's probably the most likely outcome for them.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to say. I feel comfortable RB5 will be in this tier than it is to throw names behind it. But I respect your I can't use words anymore, JP. I have no confidence like you do. I don't even have confidence in my vocabulary, but I respect the confidence you have in your takes, JP. I certainly don't have the confidence to speak on those specific RBs, but we here at Dino Construction are very excited to continue diving in. We're working on our rookie profiles, what those are going to look like for our positions. We're going to start coming out with a lot of rookie content we're going to start pumping that out near the end of the month, early February. We'll start putting out little pieces, playing around with it. So we're very, very excited to dive into this rookie class. It's the real dynasty season, guys. That whole boring time of year where I win money, that's whatever. We get to talk rookies.
God, I can't wait till you're humbled next year. You're going to win like no leagues like I did this year and have like 1 second, but like every team's going to make the playoffs. So just you have to feel that disappointment, you know?
And then the Lions are just not in the playoffs anymore.
Never gonna happen. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as useful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or review. And from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.